when we think about meeting the needs of our producers, um, you know, really being able to look at our production system, understand what is most important for us, understand some important measurables that we need to be looking at, with our cow herd, and it all goes back to really just focusing on the basics, making sure that we get acceptable calf crop wean. We do it at a cost structure that's going to be economical for us, allow us to be able to stay in business as we go forward. Um, but we think about making sure that we're meeting cow requirements and we're meeting needs on an annual basis. To me, that comes back to, are we able to maintain those females in an acceptable body condition, to the extent that we can get an acceptable pregnancy rate at a cost structure that is profitable for us year in and year out. And that's ultimately what I think.
Hi, welcome to the Beef Podcast. I'm Brad White, one of the hosts, and happy to have Dr. Jason Warner with us today. Good afternoon, Jason.
Hi, Brad. Thanks for having me on. How you doing?
Good. We are going to have a good conversation today and talk about what I know is one of your favorite topics, cows. So we'll talk about cows and a little bit about calves, touch on some nutrition, but lots of good information here relative to cow-calf management, cow-calf health, and we're going to talk about some of the new things. Even though cows have been around for a long time, there's some new things, some new opportunities coming out. Before we dive into that, tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, well, thanks, Brad. So I've been at Kansas State University now for just a little over a year. I started last August of 2022. Um, Originally from Nebraska, grew up in South Central Nebraska. Family cow calf and diversified farming operation there. That's what really, of course, like all of us, got the interest sparked, and really helped kind of fuel my interest in being in this profession. And went through University of Nebraska Lincoln for my training. Worked in industry for about 7 years, primarily on the nutrition side of the industry, and always really enjoyed the extension and the research aspect of what we do at land grant institutions. And so that's what drew me to Kansas State. And so I've had the opportunity to come on board the Department of Animal Sciences and Industry as a faculty member. So primarily an extension specialist, mostly an extension, smaller research appointment, but really focused on serving our producers around the state, our stakeholders, allied industry as well, our extension staff, and I'm primarily on the cow-calf nutrition, reproductive management side of things. So it's been great. I really enjoy working with producers, and we have a lot of good ones here, not only as we do all across the country, but here in this general area, and fortunate to work with them. So
Yeah, and that's a good thing. And your specialty areas or expertise are in some great ones for cow calf, because we will sometimes talk about the nutrition or rations in other production species, but on the cow side, that's one of our big drivers of whether herds are profitable or not, right? How we feed them, how we manage them, and the other side that you mentioned, the repro, the other place we look. So maybe thinking about those, what do you see as some of the opportunities in beef cattle nutrition and management, or what are some of the new things maybe coming down the pike, even in management or nutrition wise?
it's interesting. So when we think about a lot of these things, as I think about specifically kind of segmenting out our industry, our all facets of our cattle industry, we've got to function and work cohesively together in order to be successful, right? But when I think about specifically the cow calf segment of that industry, it's a segment that I think historically we've been a little lower rate of return, consistent profitability, maybe more so than what we've seen from some of the other segments of the industry, but a little bit lower rate of return. As a result, with just the way the business is structured, there's never been historically as much of a need for folks to adopt more advanced nutrition management practices and maybe implement some new technologies because the rate of return there initially maybe isn't quite there as what we would typically see and as we get into the stocker and the finishing segments of the industry. And so, when I think about it, I think that is an area of the industry that probably can stand to benefit the most from research, application of new information and technologies. Uh, and it's a little bit quicker to see rates of return and response from the adaption and the utilization of some of those things when we get into feed yard sectors. And so those are kind of some things that I generally just kind of big picture when I think about just the way our industry is structured and how folks generally approach things. But when I think about on the nutrition side of things, the cow in and of herself is an area that just in general we don't know as much about her because people have not focused uh, the time and the effort and in the research side of things, maybe as trying to understand her as well as what we do the finishing animal. And so I think that there's a lot of opportunity for growth there and for us as a profession to contribute to the knowledge base and the improvement and the success of that segment of the industry. Um, some things that I think are important that I think we don't have a very good handle on is really having a very good a true understanding of what really drives forage intake in beef cows and specifically understanding forage intake in a grazing situation and how that comes back to impact uh, the ability for that female to meet her protein and energy requirements. That's just an area when we think about nutrition in general and specifically on the cow side of things, we don't have a very good handle on. That's an area that certainly I think is one where we could stand to benefit from some work on.
Yeah, and let me follow up on that, just because there's a couple things there relative to forage intake on cows that I'd like to get your opinion on because one way to look at it is the variability among cows, and then we could be talking forage intake or feed efficiency of the grazing adult, or
Yep.
the selection of forages that they pick. Because once those cows learn what they like to eat, that's what they like to eat, and they're not eating to fulfill necessarily a nutritional requirement as much as this is what I like to eat, and hopefully it's good. What do you see advances in either managing selective grazing or limiting selective grazing, and how do we handle that variability among cows, or is there a lot of variability among cows?
I think the information would suggest there certainly is a lot of variability among those animals, and just truly being able to get good estimates of what those values are in a grazing situation gets to be challenging. There's the variation that we see there from animal to animal is certainly real. Um, I think at the same time too, we always got to be focused on the overall average of the herd, and that's how we're gonna try to approach things. But that individual animal to animal variation is very very substantial. And so when we think about things like trying to put and you kind of think about how we tie in what folks are doing on the genetic side of things and kind of the way the industry is focused on trying to improve efficiency, try to decrease cost of production because we know that that's important. We're trying to get a good handle on what drives forage intake, um, because that variability is there the opportunity to put selection pressure on it. All those kinds of questions, those things are important, and that's an area where that drives our costs, and that's gonna have implications for us as we go into the future for sure.
So following up on the grazing, and I may ask a question. I don't know if you've done anything in this area, but is the grazing behavior, is that innate or is it learned? Because I know there's some areas of the country where we graze different pastures, and the calf grazing with his mom, if she goes up the hill, he goes up the hill, or not. How much of that do you think is innate versus learned behavior? If it's learned, we might be able to teach him to graze a little bit different.
I think to an extent it is learned. I think the data would suggest that is inherently true. I think when we take animals from one location, one environment, put them in a different one, we oftentimes will see anecdotal evidence that our performance may not necessarily be the same. And I think a lot of that is due to a learned behavior when those animals are out there in that type of a setting. An example of that would be, when we think about, for instance, this time of year, folks going out and grazing cattle on crop residues after harvest. That there's people that have told me, multiple times, and I think there's some data that would support this, that when they have a set of young females, maybe even first calf heifers, as an example, that if they've never been on a type of forage base like that before, and they see it for the first time, there's a lot of time spent by those animals where they're walking the fence, and they're not truly grazing like they would if had they been previously exposed to it. Those types of things. So I think that is certainly real. I think the learned aspect of it. There's a lot that we don't know about these animals, and I think that's certainly part of it. But those are just some things I think. We think about just cow nutrition in general and kind of applying it back to what we see out there. Those are some areas we don't know a lot about, or we have substantial knowledge to gain, certainly.
Yeah, it'd be. There's a lot to learn there, and that's what I've seen that before. Where while the heifers, as you described, are walking the fence, the cows are going to get the good stuff because they've been there before. They know what they're going to. They're going to find whatever's potentially the best to get out of that, if it's in a corn residue or whatever they're in. So there's some advantages to having been there before.
Yep, yep. I think that's certainly true. Yeah,
So
yeah.
following up on the feeding grazing side, one of the things to think about from a nutrition standpoint is always how well do our cows match our environment, right? Because you just talked about there's some variation around the country, what type of feed we have, what type of cows. Does that tie into this discussion on matching specific cow type, either size or frame of cow relative to where we are located?
I think that is certainly the case. That's always the mindset that we want to try to achieve. The goal, I think, that we want to try to achieve is having a cow herd that's developed to really thrive and be productive in the environment that you are in. Um, and sometimes I wonder, I know producers, we've certainly made a lot of progress in that area, but at the same time too, you think about cattle are extremely mobile now today. With way that we just manage cattle in general, maybe more so, I think, probably than what they have been in the past. And there's cattle getting moved all over the country, maybe from one corner of one state to another corner of another state. Maybe for 6 months out of the year, just depending on what the situation is. Those types of management activities that, you always kind of wonder, okay, well, how well are some of these animals really able to really truly adapt and get really ingrained into their environment. And I think certainly the longer they're in one place, the longer that can happen, the more extent that can happen. But sometimes I wonder how much selection we put on that, and do we have a real great way to measure it and truly understand it? But it's certainly part of it, absolutely. Yeah.
So we started this part talking about opportunities for the cow calf producer. How do these feeding, grazing, understanding which cows, how they match the environment, how does this play into an opportunity for us as cow calf producers? What actions could I take?
So as I think about it, I think really, when we think about meeting the needs of our producers, um, you know, really being able to look at our production system, understand what is most important for us, understand some important measurables that we need to be looking at, with our cow herd, and it all goes back to really just focusing on the basics. making sure that we get acceptable calf crop wean. We do it at a cost structure that's going to be economical for us, allow us to be able to stay in business as we go forward. Um, but we think about making sure that we're meeting cow requirements and we're meeting needs on an annual basis. To me, that comes back to, are we able to maintain those females in an acceptable body condition to the extent that we can get an acceptable pregnancy rate at a cost structure that is profitable for us year in and year out. And that's ultimately what I think we've got to ultimately look at. Those are the big things that I think that oftentimes I think we forget. Those are the fundamental things we've always got to go back to.
Yeah. So if you're measuring productivity, you're really looking at, are we getting the cows bred every year? And are they staying in the herd, and are they staying in reasonable body condition? In which case they're getting bred.
Reproduction's got to be part of it. Reproduction has ultimately got to be part of it. So absolutely, it's one thing. It's one thing if we have a female that maybe her mature weight, her mature size is a little bit bigger, and maybe her initial cost structure in terms of her cost per head per day is maybe a little bit higher based on what her forage intake is. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if that female rebreeds every year, we look at it on a herd average basis, if her percentage calf crop weaned as a relative to the number of females we expose, if that's acceptable for us, and by that I'm usually meaning somewhere between maybe 84, 85% or higher, if that's better for us in that regard, then that's workable. So um, the females ultimately got to fit from a reproduction standpoint. That's ultimately what it comes back to.
Well, and that's just what I was going to ask you. Is you already led into it. You're one step ahead of me. But thinking about the targets. So you said 84 to 85% would be calves weaned per cow exposed. That's your
That's right.
that's your
Yep.
target. And then playing into that comes the pregnancy rate. So if I look at uh, pregnancy rate at say mid gestation, or when we would typically preg check, what's your target for pregnancy rate in those cows? Because that gives me kind of an early evaluation of what next year will be like.
Absolutely. So there's some different ways that someone can approach this. I think when we look at the overall picture of the U.S. cow herd in general, I think the data would say, based on the number of calves that we get weaned relative to our total cow herd inventory, I think we're probably somewhere like 82 to maybe 84% total wean relative to the total number of females that we have there. And so I think if you back out of it, if the data would say, well, okay, if you can have, let's just say a 96% pregnancy rate, in a set of females. So if you run 4% open, and then okay, maybe if you have another 3-4% calf death loss in there somewhere uh, prior to the start of the calving season, and then another 3 to 4% calf death loss somewhere right in there around calving up until the time of weaning. Okay, so if you have 8% there and you're on 4% open, okay, so now you're back to 12%. Maybe you can be 87, 88% total weaned of exposed. That's kind of the rule of thumb that I like to use there. So I think that's certainly achievable for a lot of operations. Um, again, I think our national average, when you look at it, number of calves weaned relative to the total cow herd base, would be a little bit lower than that. But I think those numbers are certainly achievable for a lot of producers. When I look at what our pregnancy rates are, I think that's certainly doable. It's just a matter of, are we calculating it in that manner and really understanding those numbers. So
Yeah, I think that's a great point because you're the way you're describing it allows me to account for the number of cows that I had when the bull bred them, which would be
right,
several months ago last year, and then
yep,
they calved this year, and then they weaned those calves. So it's not as simple as counting how many calves and how many cows I have today. It is
right,
how many cows that I have at the breeding season, one breeding season ago, right?
Exactly, and that's just one of those measurements that I think is really important when we think about just evaluating the productivity of a herd overall. I think that's an important thing to go back to. When you talk to folks, we can look at this a couple of different ways. Is it you say, okay, if I'm looking at a weaning rate on a cow herd, is that just number of calves weaned relative to the number of live calves that you had when you were all done calving, or relative to the number of pregnant females that you had at the start of that calving season. But going back to, when we initially started this conversation about just ways to think about where we can improve performance on a set of cows and understand, are we meeting the nutrient requirements of a cow herd on an annual basis, doing that substantially and doing that in an economical manner, understanding, looking at calves weaned per cow exposed on that basis, like we're describing here. I think that's just a really important measurement for understanding where we are from just an overall production standpoint, and it accounts for those other losses that we can have throughout that production cycle. It's harder with cows because our our biological window there is longer, and as you alluded to, Brad, yeah, we've got maybe 16, 17 months there from the time when we make the decision to breed a set of females until we get that ultimate calf crop weaned. But it's an important number to look at, because if we have some issues maybe with either pregnancy rate on a set of females, or maybe just management right around the time of calving, maybe it's a health concern for us, those types of things, for whatever reason we're a little bit lower there on the number that we would like to have from calves weaned per cow exposed. We can use those numbers to help identify where that's coming from.
Oh, you're absolutely right. I think that's the key.
Yep, yep, yep. And that to me is the big thing. Is, okay, really being able to break it down, understand where those losses are coming from, so we can pinpoint management, right?
So I may transition topics here a little bit, and one of the other ones that I know I wanted to visit with you about is we're coming into fall, winter. So as we think about managing cows, and it's relevant to this conversation we were just having, because often this is we're around pregnancy test time for a lot of herds. So they're going to be evaluating pregnancy. They're going to be thinking about winter. Some parts of the country have been short on hay, fall grazing, other supplies. Give me some tips for managing my cows, and I'll just give you the scenario of a spring calving herd. And I want to manage my cows from now through spring, thinking about the nutrition, anything else you might want to throw in there.
I think really now is a key time to be really just thinking about some key management strategies for this coming up fall. And as I think about, to me, one of the biggest ones is with higher feed costs, and we're working, as you mentioned, we're working into a situation where we've got tighter forage inventory as we go forward, maybe than what we've had in the past. So I think strategic supplementation this year is going to be key for us. We've seen some moderation to an extent in some feed prices from what they were a couple of years ago. They've some things have moderated a little bit. Some of our protein and energy sources. Of course, we've seen a correction in this corn market now, which has kind of changed things for us. But certainly, still, we're at a higher cost structure than what we've been. And I think now, if folks are making pregnancy checking decisions right now, and if they're going to be doing a lot of that on cow herds here over the next month or so, really using that time when you've got females in and assess them for body condition score is really important, and get a good, accurate read on where those cows are condition score wise. Because if you've got some cows, if they're thin, that last 60 to 90 days prior to calving is really critical, and that's when we can use that time to increase weight and condition on a set of cows, and we can still do it fairly economically at that point. It's a whole lot harder to do that after calving. But if we need to make some strategic supplementation decisions prior to calving, now is a good time to be doing that, and identifying females if we need to put some additional supplementation into. And at the same time too, if body condition score is on our side, maybe we don't calve till a little bit later in the spring, and we don't necessarily have to supplement those females here during the initial part of the fall and maybe on and through the end of the year if forage quality is adequate for us and we've got enough forage out there for those females to meet their needs. If conditions on our side we don't have to supplement those females, I think this is a year where it would be very beneficial for us to do that. So really getting an adequate read on body condition, strategic supplementation, understanding forage quality, the basics. We talk about that a lot with folks, but understanding forage quality is really critical through sampling, and it's easier said than done, and we always see issues with that every year, and it's going to be key for us this year with lower forage inventories, as you mentioned.
So following up on that, you mentioned good body condition or a little bit thin. Give me some more details. What are you looking for cows? What would you expect them to be at this time of year, and when would you intervene? Because you said that may be your cut point on whether you'd supplement or not.
Absolutely. I think if we've got females right now, if they're a condition score 5 or less, and so, we're thinking about a female that she's got some more, we're thinking about a female that's going to have more visible, or, excuse me, I'm going to rephrase that. She's going to have, we're going to be able to see rib bones, her spinous process a little bit better. She's going to have not as smooth of an appearance, especially when we look at her from behind her shoulder and back across her top line, less full across her tail head, through her hooks and pins. So a little bit thinner female. Those are the types of females we really want to study closely. And if we can intervene with those types of females that have that appearance for us, they're going to be the ones that are going to be more challenging for us if we don't take a more proactive approach and add some weight and some condition to them as we go forward into the winter. Conversely, female it's a condition score 5 or better. So if has a smoother appearance to her, more full, especially across her tailhead, when you look at where she's deposited that condition and that body energy reserves, those types of females, there's a real key distinction between a 4 and a 5, especially when we look at pregnancy rates and those types of things. Those females certainly are ones that we've got to focus on a little bit closer. So, those females that have got body condition on them, those are going to be the ones where, especially if we're farther out from calving, we can maintain that female on a lower quality forage base, maybe with a lower amount of supplement here initially starting off with, and if we can avoid, putting a lot of unnecessary feed into those females, that's going to be beneficial for us as we go. So really kind of reading females for those key indicators, I think is important. Certainly, you flip it around a little bit, fall calving cows, this time of year, you mentioned spring calving cows, but folks with fall calving cows right now where, they're going to be getting farther into lactation, and especially if Mother Nature kind of starts to work against us, that's going to be important to watch what we're doing from a management nutrition standpoint on them as well too.
Well, and I like your point that you made earlier. Right now, we've got time. So you've got time on the spring calving cows. The fall calving cows, you only have a little bit of time before their breeding season is going to come up. But if
That's
you
right.
have time, you can do a lot with cow nutrition.
Yep, and that's the thing. I think that's one of the things we always have to be, focused on emphasizing with producers is it's being proactive, it's thinking ahead, and it's really easy. I think for folks, we get busy with other activities and other things, and all of a sudden calving rolls around pretty quick, and if we've not done those things to really prepare ourselves from a nutrition standpoint, and really that just goes back to body condition on these females going into calving. Most of the problems when I've worked with producers where we've had issues with either low milk production, high rates of calf death loss right around the time of calving, those types of things. When we run into an issue like that, more times than not, it is tied back to a deficiency in protein or energy, somewhere either late gestation or early lactation, more so than it is anything else. And so, understanding that last 60 to 90 days prior to calving is really critical. This better than anybody, the importance of colostrum and how that interacts with colostrum quality, all those things. It's so critical for us. And when we ran into challenging situations with calf death loss, when I worked with producers on that, it's more times than not tied back to something like that. Yep. Yep.
Yeah, that nutrition through gestation impacts a lot, and we don't always see it right away. And you mentioned this earlier, it's the biological lag of cows, right? It's different than many of our other production species. If we think of uh, swine or dairy or even feedlot scenarios, you have all stages of production going all the time, and you have daily inputs and measurements. With cows, we have a breeding, and you mentioned 16 months later we have a calf that we can sell. It There's a big lag there between everything that happens from the time that cow was bred all the way through. So, which leads me to I also wanted to ask you. I know you do some research. You have other research that you see that others do. What are some of the most exciting things you see in cow calf research right now?
I would say some of the things that I think are really going to be integral for us going forward is having a better handle on what vitamin requirements are in cows and how our requirements potentially need to change as we advance cows through stages of production. That's one that there's being some progress made in that, but boy, what we know in that is so limited, and we really got an opportunity there, I think, to really increase our knowledge base, and that is one that I think is really really important. Um, on the other hand, too, I think another area um, that I think just in general we're lacking in is we looked at, this ties back into what we're discussing here. We've looked at uh, situations where we've under supplemented females, during that late gestation time period. Well, okay, if we're trying to understand what the implications are of under supplementing, but have we really been able to truly understand, what requirements are during that time period, and what does additional supplementation, higher levels of protein or energy supplementation look like in a female? What kinds of responses can we see there, both in her production as it ties back to reproduction, but then what implications does that potentially have on calf performance as well too? So it's kind of looking at it from a little different angle there.
Well, I think a great point on the both the vitamin and the nutrition side. A lot of the research that was done, and you correct me, but a lot of the research that was done to establish those requirements is not recent. So a lot of our nutrition requirements are based on things that were in the past, and arguably cattle are different, and the way we feed them is different. Is that a fair statement?
Well, I think certainly as we think about vitamin nutrition in the cow, I think that's certainly true, absolutely. And we've got, there's colleagues around the country that are making some efforts in that, just in general in our field, our professional field. And it's very very much needed, and I think our industry professionals, um, whether they be nutritionists or veterinarians or folks who are in the feed service side of the business, there's information there that they can certainly stand to benefit from. And then ultimately our producers at the end of the day. So there's a lot of folks that can benefit from additional efforts in that area. It's challenging to do, but it's beneficial certainly.
Yeah, back to what we said earlier. The same applies to research. There's a biological lag in cows. So if we're going to do vitamin, mineral, or nutrition research and look at how it impacts the weaned calf or her next reproductive cycle, those are not short projects.
That's right. That's
You
right.
want to be sure your grad student is signed up for the long haul with those projects.
And those types of things they're very much needed. it's more challenging to do. Absolutely, but yeah, it's we could really benefit from that.
Yep, I think there's some real benefits there. And speaking of we've talked about the research, we talked about the areas of challenges. Is there anything we're missing? Anything else big on the radar screen for cow calf that we're missing as we've had this conversation?
I think those are the big things. On the reproduction side of things, I think things that we can do to better understand male fertility. I think those are some things that there's certainly progress that could be made in that. Um, there's some folks working on refining and improving responses to some of these estrus synchronization protocols that I think are I think that there's really interesting work being done in that area. It's got to fit with how producers manage and how they're going to be able to implement that, right? But that is very much interesting. I think we're going to see some neat work be done on that here as we go also.
Absolutely. The male fertility is notoriously there's some aspects of it, depending on what you lump in there, that are notoriously hard to measure. So we can measure fertility as far as is the semen viable? Is he able to breed a cow? But we can't measure some of the other aspects. And then when we go to the AI sire, makes it a little bit trickier. But great info there.
It's time for our famous three.
As we kind of wrap up here, Jason, I've got a couple questions for you here at the end. Just to now we're going to move on from science to a little bit more of our personal interest. And one of the purposes of this show is to share information with leading professionals. So, one question is, what is your favorite beef-related book or resource? So it could be a website, could be something that you read. Where does the expert get his information?
Well, I think there's a lot of good resources out there. I think our surrounding states have all got very good, beneficial extension websites. So I'm going to put a plug in for our neighbors to the north, University of Nebraska, Oklahoma State, and Missouri as well too. Have got some good resources, and so I appreciate the efforts from our colleagues from our other universities that are making work and contributions in these areas because they all have very good, accessible, timely information on our extension sites. And that's very good to see, and we need to continue to have that for our industry. Absolutely. So those are some main places that I go, and then of course things like Journal Animal Science, Professional Animal Scientist, those types of journals, good information there as well too that we most of us all see. But yeah, there's great information there.
Okay. So what about outside of ag? Do you have a favorite book or a favorite resource, something that you read outside of ag?
I'm gonna have to think on that one as far as what my favorite one would be. As far as just a good general resource. Um, Good to Great is an excellent book. I'm sure most have seen that, but that's one that I personally really enjoyed that one. I read that one several times, and that's a good resource about just not only business development but just personal and professional development. I think that's a very valuable one as well.
Yep, that's a good one. Last question for you. Uh, in your opinion, what sets apart successful beef professionals? So maybe what makes them somebody that you would call successful, or what are the characteristics that they have that really sets them apart?
I think as I think about the folks that are in our industry, and the thing that I really enjoy and appreciate about the folks that are within our profession. And when I say profession, I mean all professionals that are working in the beef cattle industry. So it's that broad, right? They can be in at a research institution, land grant institution, private industry, in a number of different fields, right? But folks that are in that industry uh, are humble and hardworking, and the folks that I see that I really that I really appreciate and that I really have a tremendous amount of respect for are the ones that are never afraid to ask questions and always willing to collaborate and appreciate the opinions of others and ways where we can glean information from each other in a positive manner that develops people and makes folks feel appreciated. And I see a lot of professionals around our industry doing that. And I think that's a unique thing about us that work in the cattle industry and in that profession, because I don't think it's that way everywhere and in all industries. And I think that is a special aspect to what we do. We're all working together for a greater cause, and our ability to work together, collaborate, learn from each other, have respect for one another. I think that's top notch for me, and I see a lot of folks doing that. And I think that's great.
Absolutely. And what a great answer is what sets it apart. If I'm paraphrasing what you said, is that continuous learning, because you were humble enough to ask the questions to say, how do we get better? And you're collaborating, working with others. So really enjoy that answer. I think that's excellent. And I've enjoyed visiting with you this afternoon. It's been fun. It's kind of a shame our time's up. We've got more cow stuff. I'm sure we'll be able to catch up offline, but thanks to everyone else who joined us as well on the Beef Podcast. And thanks, Dr. Warren.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Anytime.